He saved her from a blizzard, then learned she was the CEO who tried to ruin him. The CEO's heart had stopped beating for 6 minutes before Jack managed to revive her, his callous hands pressing desperately against her chest as the blizzard howled like a wounded animal outside the cabin's frost-covered windows. Jack Mercer had been driving home from his construction job when he spotted the overturned luxury SUV half buried in snow. He'd almost missed it completely, just a glint of metal in his headlights as the storm intensified. The moment he pulled the unconscious woman from the wreckage, the wind picked up with such ferocity that his truck wouldn't start again. With the temperature plummeting and the stranger's skin turning an alarming shade of blue, Jack made the only choice he could, carrying her through knee-deep snow toward the abandoned hunting cabin he knew stood a 4-mile away. If they didn't reach shelter in the next 20 minutes, they would both freeze to death, and his 8-year-old daughter would become an orphan. The cabin was barely warmer than outside, just 4 walls and a roof to block the wind. Jack worked frantically to start a fire with the few dry logs in the wood box, while the woman lay motionless on the floor. When her breathing suddenly stopped, a cold terror gripped him unlike anything he'd felt since his wife's death 3 years ago. He wasn't a doctor, he was just a construction worker with basic first aid training. But in that moment, he became her only chance at survival. After those terrifying 6 minutes of CPR, when she finally gasped and her eyes fluttered open, Jack collapsed beside her in exhaustion. "Thank God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought I'd lost you." Her first words were barely audible. "Why would you care if you lost me? You don't even know me." Jack didn't have an answer that made sense. He just knew he couldn't let another human being die, if there was anything he could do to prevent it. He wrapped her in the only blanket he'd found and continued feeding the small fire, aware that the storm was getting worse and that the meager wood supply wouldn't last through the night. As darkness fell completely, the temperature inside the cabin dropped dangerously. The woman, who had reluctantly introduced herself as Alexandra Winters, CEO of Winters Financial Group, sat huddled in the blanket, watching Jack with weary eyes as he paced the small space, trying to generate body heat. "You should take the blanket for a while," she said, her voice stronger now, but still trembling. "I'm fine," Jack lied, though his fingers had gone numb and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. Alexandra studied him for a long moment. Then she said something that stopped him in his tracks. "I recognized you the moment I opened my eyes. You're the man who turned down my company's buyout offer last spring, the one who owns that small construction company we wanted for the riverfront development." Jack stared at her in disbelief. The woman he'd pulled from certain death was the same ruthless executive who had tried to destroy his family business. The one whose lawyers had threatened to crush him when he refused to sell the company his father had built from nothing. Before he could respond, a deafening crack split the night as a massive tree branch crashed through the cabin's roof, letting in a torrent of snow and wind. In an instant, their fragile shelter became as cold as the grave. 3 hours later, huddled in the cabin's remaining corner, Jack and Alexandra faced the grim reality that they might not survive until morning. The fire had died, the temperature had plummeted, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. "Tell me about your daughter," Alexandra said suddenly, her voice weak. "You mentioned her earlier." Jack closed his eyes, picturing Emma's face. "She's 8, smart as a whip, loves building things just like her grandfather did. She's staying with my sister this weekend." His voice caught. "If I don't make it back, you will?" Alexandra interrupted with unexpected fierceness. "You have to." "Why do you care if I make it?" Jack asked, throwing her earlier question back at her. In the darkness, he couldn't see her expression, but he heard the change in her breathing. "Because no one has ever fought to save my life before," she whispered. "Not even the people who were supposed to love me." The raw honesty in her voice struck him. For the first time, he saw beyond the corporate shark to the human being beneath. As the cold intensified, Jack realized with growing alarm that Alexandra had stopped shivering, a dangerous sign of advancing hypothermia. "We need to share body heat," he said, medical training overriding any awkwardness. "It's the only way we'll survive until morning." There was a long silence. Then Alexandra's voice came so soft he almost missed it. "Can I slip under your blanket, please?" The vulnerability in that simple request shattered something inside Jack. Without a word, he moved beside her and wrapped the blanket around them both, pulling her against his chest. She was ice cold, her expensive silk blouse offering no protection against the elements. Jack held her tightly, willing his warmth into her frozen limbs. "I never wanted to be the villain in your story," she murmured against his shoulder. "I was just doing what the board expected. What my father would have done." "And what do you want?" Jack asked. Her answer was lost as the cabin's door suddenly burst open, sending a blast of Arctic air through the room. In the doorway stood a massive figure backlit by swirling snow. "Don't move," the figure commanded, voice muffled by a thick scarf. A powerful flashlight beam swept across the cabin, momentarily blinding Jack. He instinctively tightened his grip around Alexandra, shielding her with his body. "We're just trying to survive the storm," Jack called out, heart hammering. "My truck broke down after I rescued this woman from an accident." The figure stepped inside, closing the door against the howling wind. As the flashlight lowered, Jack made out the insignia on the heavy Parka Mountain Rescue Service. "You two are lucky I was doing a sweep of the area," the rescuer said, pulling down his scarf to reveal a weathered face with kind eyes. "Name's Mike Townsend. Got a distress call about a missing executive who never made it to her destination. Guessing that's you, Mom." Alexandra nodded weakly against Jack's chest. "Alexandra Winters." Mike assessed the situation quickly. "The collapsed roof section, the extinguished fire, their huddled forms. You've got moderate to severe hypothermia. Both of you. My snowmobile's outside, but in this weather we can't risk the journey to town." He unshouldered his large pack. "Good news is I've got emergency supplies. Let's get you both stabilized." Within minutes, Mike had set up a portable heater, emergency thermal blankets, and was preparing hot drinks from his thermos. As warmth gradually returned to the cabin, Jack felt Alexandra's rigid muscles begin to relax against him. Though neither made a move to separate. "Your assistant reported you missing when you didn't arrive at the mountain retreat," Mike explained to Alexandra as he checked her vitals. "Said you insisted on driving yourself despite warnings about the storm." A faint flush colored Alexandra's pale cheeks. "I've never let weather dictate my schedule." "Well, if not for this, gentlemen, we'd be having a very different conversation right now," Mike said gravely. "Or no conversation at all." As Mike worked to patch the roof breach with an emergency tarp, Jack became acutely aware of Alexandra's proximity, the delicate scent of her expensive perfume, still somehow present beneath the sharper smells of cold and fear, the softness of her body against his rough workman's frame. When their eyes met, something electric passed between them. "Thank you," she whispered, for his ears alone. "Not just for saving me, but for seeing me, the real me." Jack didn't know how to respond. This woman had been his nemesis, the face of corporate greed threatening everything he valued. Yet here, stripped of power and pretense, she was simply human, vulnerable, complex, and somehow familiar in a way that resonated deep within him. "The storm's expected to pass by morning," Mike announced, returning to check on them. "First light will get you both to the hospital." That night, as Alexandra slept fitfully beside him under the thermal blankets, Jack remained awake, troubled by conflicting emotions. He thought of Emma, how she'd lost her mother and nearly lost him too. He thought of his struggling business, the legacy his father had entrusted to him. And he thought of Alexandra, how different she seemed from the cold executive who had tried to steamroll his company. People weren't always who they appeared to be. Sometimes circumstances forced them into roles they never wanted to play. Jack knew this from his own life, from the mask of strength he wore for Emma's sake while grief hollowed him from within. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, Alexandra stirred beside him. For a moment, disoriented from sleep, she looked at him without the barriers of their respective positions. Just a woman gazing at a man who had held her through the darkest night. "I had a dream," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep, "that we were building something together, something beautiful." Before Jack could respond, Mike announced it was time to leave. The moment shattered, reality rushing back in. Alexandra withdrew, the corporate mask slipping back into place as she thanked Mike formally and avoided Jack's eyes. The mountain rescue worker who found them brought them to the nearest hospital, where Jack learned that the storm had caused a multi-car pileup on the highway. If he hadn't spotted Alexandra's SUV when he did, she would have been buried completely within the hour. Alexandra was admitted with severe hypothermia and frostbite on her fingers and toes. Jack, suffering from exposure but in better condition, was treated and released the next day. He returned home to his daughter, telling her they had a guardian angel watching over them. A week passed with no word from Alexandra. Jack tried to put the experience behind him, focusing on his work and his daughter. But something had changed inside him during those hours in the cabin. Some wall he built after his wife's death had begun to crumble. The local newspaper ran a small story about the rescue, identifying Alexandra only as a prominent business executive. Jack kept the clipping, though he couldn't have explained why. At night, after Emma was asleep, he found himself replaying those hours in the cabin, wondering what Alexandra had been about to say before Mike's arrival. Meanwhile, at Winters' financial headquarters in the city, Alexandra faced a different kind of storm. Her near-death experience had shaken her profoundly, calling into question the values and priorities that had guided her career. The board members, concerned about her extended absence and rumors of unusual behavior, watched her with calculating eyes as she returned to work. "The riverfront development is our priority," Harrison Wells, the senior board member, reminded her during her first meeting back. "We need to move forward with acquiring those properties, including that stubborn construction company." Alexandra found herself staring at the architectural renderings of luxury condominiums that would replace the working-class neighborhood where Jack's business operated. Once she had seen only profit margins and shareholder value. Now she saw families, communities, lives being uprooted. What if we considered an alternative approach, she suggested, surprising everyone, including herself. A development that incorporates existing businesses, creates affordable housing alongside luxury units. Harrison's expression hardened. That's not what your father would have done. My father isn't here, Alexandra replied quietly. And I nearly wasn't either. That evening, alone in her penthouse apartment with its panoramic city views, Alexandra felt more isolated than she had in the storm-battered cabin. There, at least, human connection had cut through the cold. Here, surrounded by expensive furnishings that held no memories or meaning, she realized how empty her life had become. On impulse, she searched for information about Jack's construction company. Mercer & Son had been founded by Jack's father 30 years ago, specializing in restoration of historic buildings and community-centered projects. Their website featured before and after photos of lovingly restored structures and testimonials from grateful community members. One photo showed Jack with his arm around a small girl with his same determined chin and kind eyes, Emma, the daughter he'd been so desperate to return to. Alexandra made her decision that night. The next morning, she presented the board with a comprehensive new vision for the riverfront development, one that would preserve the neighborhood's character while still providing healthy returns. When Harrison and his allies pushed back, she stood her ground with a conviction that surprised even herself. This is the direction Winters Financial is taking under my leadership, she stated firmly. Those who don't share this vision are welcome to tender their resignations. 3 board members did exactly that. The remaining members, sensing the shift in power, reluctantly approved her plan, but Alexandra knew the victory was temporary. Harrison wouldn't surrender so easily and he had powerful allies. Then, on a clear Sunday morning, a knock came at his door. Alexandra stood on his porch, her normally perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a sweater. The only hint of her corporate identity was the sleek car parked in his driveway. I had to see you, she said without preamble. To thank you properly, Jack invited her in, acutely aware of his modest home with its mismatched furniture and crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. Emma peeked Shelley from behind the kitchen door, curious about their visitor. Over coffee at his scratched kitchen table, Alexandra told him she'd resigned as CEO of Winters Financial. The board thinks I've lost my mind, she said with a small smile. Maybe I have, or maybe I found it again in that cabin with you. What she didn't tell him was the full story. How Harrison had threatened to expose financial irregularities from her father's tenure if she continued with her new vision. How she discovered the depth of corruption within the company her family had built. How she'd chosen to walk away rather than compromise the clarity she'd found in those desperate hours fighting for survival. What will you do now? Jack asked. Alexandra's eyes met his. I'm starting over, creating something that builds communities instead of tearing them down. She hesitated, and I was hoping maybe you could help me. Before Jack could respond, Emma burst into the room, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Are you the lady my dad saved? She asked Alexandra directly. Alexandra looked startled, then her expression softened. Yes, I am. But what your dad might not have told you is that he saved more than just my life. She glanced at Jack. He saved my heart too. Emma considered this with the serious contemplation only children can muster. My dad fixes lots of things, she declared finally. He fixed our house after Mom died. He fixed Mrs. Peterson's roof when it leaked. He even fixed my teddy bear when his arm came off. Jack felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment, but Alexandra's eyes shimmered with unexpected tears. Your dad is very special that way, she agreed softly. After Emma returned to her coloring books, Alexandra explained her vision to Jack, a development company focused on revitalizing struggling neighborhoods while ensuring original residents weren't displaced. Using her business expertise and connections combined with his construction knowledge and community relationships, they could create something truly transformative. Why me? Jack asked, still wary despite the undeniable pull he felt toward her. There are bigger construction firms, ones with more resources. Because you understand what matters. Alexandra answered simply, you see the value in things others would discard, in people others would leave behind. Her voice dropped in me. That evening, after Alexandra had gone, Jack sat on Emma's bed during their nightly story time, his mind still reeling from the unexpected proposal, both professional and perhaps something more. I liked her, Daddy, Emma said sleepily. She looks at you the way Mommy used to. Jack's throat tightened. What do you mean, sweetheart? Like you're her favorite person? Emma murmured, drifting towards sleep. Can she come back tomorrow? In that moment, looking at his daughter's trusting face, Jack realized how long they'd both been merely surviving rather than truly living. The thought of opening himself to possibility, to potential hurt, terrified him. But hadn't he learned in that cabin that sometimes the greatest risk was in not reaching out? The partnership began cautiously. Alexandra used her settlement from Winters Financial to establish Cornerstone Development with Jack's company handling the construction aspects. Their first project was modest, renovating an abandoned community center in a neglected neighborhood. As they worked side by side, the connection that had sparked in the cabin deepened and evolved. Alexandra revealed herself to be different from the corporate shark he'd imagined. Brilliant and driven, yes, but also thoughtful, genuinely concerned about the impact of their work. Jack showed her a side of the city she'd never seen, introducing her to families who had lived in these neighborhoods for generations, helping her understand their needs and dreams. Emma became their unofficial mascot, visiting construction sites after school, charming community members with her earnest questions and bright ideas. Alexandra taught her about blueprints and budgets. Jack showed her how to hammer nails and mix cement. Together, they were healing something in each other that had been broken long before the storm. 6 months later, Jack's construction company partnered with Alexandra's new community development foundation. Together, they broke ground on affordable housing projects that would help hundreds of families. The former CEO, who once represented everything Jack despised, had become his strongest ally and something more. Their relationship evolved naturally, neither rushing nor resisting the growing connection between them. They found themselves lingering after meetings, sharing quiet dinners after Emma went to bed, gradually revealing the layers of their lives to each other. Alexandra told Jack about growing up as the only child of a demanding father who saw vulnerability as weakness, how she'd learned to hide her true self behind a polished corporate facade, how lonely it had been at the top, surrounded by people who wanted something from her, but never really saw her. Jack shared the story of his wife's illness, the brutal 2 years of watching cancer steal her away piece by piece, how he'd promised her he would keep their daughter safe and their family business alive, how some days just getting out of bed had felt like climbing a mountain. "The night I found you," Jack confessed one evening as they walked along the riverfront where their biggest project was taking shape, was the anniversary of her death. "I was driving home from visiting her grave." Alexandra's hand found his in the gathering darkness. "Maybe she sent you to me," she said softly, "and me to you." Their first kiss came naturally on a crisp autumn evening as they stood on the porch of Jack's home, after Emma had fallen asleep during a movie night. It felt both new and familiar, like coming home to a place you'd only seen in dreams. Not everyone supported their partnership. Harrison Wells, still smarting from his defeat at Winters Financial, used his connections to create obstacles, delayed permits, withdrawn funding, negative press. Alexandra's former colleagues whispered that she'd lost her edge, gone soft. Some of Jack's longtime clients were wary of his association with a corporate type, fearing their neighborhood would be the next target for gentrification. Through it all, they held firm to their vision and to each other. When Emma came home crying because a classmate had said Alexandra was just using her dad to look good for the newspapers, Jack sat her down and explained that sometimes people judge what they don't understand. "How do you know she really cares about us?" Emma asked, her young face troubled. Jack thought carefully before answering. "Because when it mattered most, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose, she showed me who she truly is. And I believe in that person with all my heart." On the anniversary of the blizzard that nearly claimed their lives, Jack took Alexandra back to the cabin, now rebuilt and properly insulated. As snow fell gently outside, so different from the storm that had brought them together, he asked her the question that had been on his mind for months. Her answer was yes before he even finished asking. That night, wrapped in blankets before a proper fire, Alexandra confessed something she'd never told anyone. "I was ready to give up that night in the SUV. My life felt empty, meaningless. When the storm hit and I lost control, part of me thought it might be easier to just let go." Jack pulled her closer. "And now I understand what you knew all along, that every life has value. That connection is what gives us meaning." She looked up at him. "You didn't just save a stranger that night. You showed me how to live again." Their wedding was small and intimate, held in the community garden they'd helped create. Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, beaming with pride as she watched her father marry the woman who had, in her 8-year-old words, melted his frozen heart. Alexandra wore a simple white dress instead of the designer gown everyone expected. Jack wore the first suit he'd owned since his wife's funeral. Mike Townsend, the mountain rescuer who had found them that fateful night, was Jack's best man. "Never seen two people more meant for each other," Mike said during his toast. "Sometimes the universe has to throw one heck of a storm to blow away all the barriers between two souls." In the years that followed, Cornerstone Development became a model for ethical urban renewal across the country. Jack and Alexandra were invited to speak at conferences, consult with city planners, and share their vision of development that served communities rather than displacing them. Emma grew into a confident young woman who combined her father's practical skills with Alexandra's business acumen. By the time she was 16, she was already designing her own small renovation projects and talking about studying sustainable architecture in college. On cold winter nights, when snow blanketed the city in hushed white, Jack and Alexandra would sometimes sit by their fireplace and remember the night that had changed everything. How close they had come to losing each other before they'd even had a chance to meet. How a single decision to stop, to help, to care had altered the course of both their lives. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexandra asked once, pulling over that night. "You could have driven past, stayed safe and warm." Jack considered the question seriously. "I've regretted many things in my life," he said finally, "but never an act of kindness. Those are the only choices I'm absolutely certain of." Their story spread beyond their small community, touching hearts and inspiring others to reach out across the divisions that separate us. It reminded people that sometimes in our darkest moments, the hand that pulls us back from the edge might belong to someone we least expect. On the 10th anniversary of the blizzard, they published a book about their experience and the community development model they'd created. The proceeds established a foundation to help other cities implement similar programs. At the book launch, a young reporter asked what message they hoped readers would take from their story. Alexandra looked at Jack, at the lines that a decade of laughter and shared purpose had etched around his eyes, at the hand that still reached for hers instinctively in moments both difficult and joyful. That we're all just one connection away from transformation. She said that the walls we build between ourselves and others, of class, of background, of assumption, are more fragile than we think. One act of genuine humanity can shatter them completely. Jack nodded, squeezing her hand, and that sometimes what looks like the worst night of your life might actually be the beginning of your best days. That evening, as they walked home through gently falling snow, Jack pulled Alexandra close and whispered, "Remember when you asked if you could slip under my blanket?" She laughed, the sound bright in the winter air. "Best request I ever made. Best request I ever granted," he replied, kissing her forehead, "though I think technically it was my blanket." "Details," Alexandra murmured, leaning into his embrace. "The important thing is we've been sharing ever since. If this story of two frozen hearts finding unexpected warmth moved you, remember that acts of kindness can transform lives in ways we never imagine. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that second chances and new beginnings are always possible, even in the coldest storms. Because sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin in the most unlikely places, like a ruthless blizzard, a wrecked SUV, and a single whispered request that changed everything. One act of kindness turned a deadly storm into the beginning of their best days.